Back in October of 2022, I once again attended the record fair here in Burlington, Vermont. And as you could imagine, I'm going to talk about the event, the vendors, and the venues. Plus, I'll be showing and chatting about all of the records I got. Should be fun. Stick around. So this was the 6th annual event, having been to all but the first of them. The official opening time is noon and is free, but if you want to get in an hour early, you got to pay $5, which is basically what I always do. Speaking of, the venue was once again at Nectar's here in Burlington, Vermont. However, this time I was late getting out the door, having just come back from an 8-day vacation out of state and being fairly wiped out. So I wasn't first in the early bird line as I usually am. I was maybe 30th or 40th, but I still made out decently. I only spotted a couple of folks looking for metal, which was helpful. I mean, the crowd at these events is often looking for jazz or Grateful Dead or classic rock records, so not much competition in that regard. And I gotta say, for the second time in a row, I did forget to bring my glasses to this thing, but I suppose that's what the magnifier on your iPhone is for. In a pinch, of course. Actually glad I used it, though, because I spotted some reissues there, and I typically prefer OG pressings if I can get them. Don't want to be fooled, so it's good to have that. So the number of vendors was claimed to be over 20, but realistically it was probably more like 16, but that's still a pretty solid number, especially when you factor in how much stock each vendor brings, which is quite a bit. As for the vendors, I did see Bookspieler Records from Montpelier, Vermont. Xavier was vending, but also doubling as one of the DJs, which they do have at these events. This year was 5 DJs. Usually it's not music that I'm into, but that doesn't really matter to me since I'm only there for the records and basically to chat with folks. Other vendors, including Jensen's Vinyl Garage from Plattsburgh, New York was there. Also Black Dog Records from Bloomingdale, New York. I think Studebaker Hawk from Massachusetts was there, as well as Autumn Records from Winooski, Vermont, right next door to us. But also about 11 other individuals, either by themselves or associated with some sort of music merchandising company. I would say that definitely, I bought from and talked with a whole lot of folks. Speaking of which, a nice girl, probably around junior high school age, approached me and told me she liked a video of mine that she had watched that very morning before she left for the event. Very sweet girl, super nice that she said hello. I know that's not always easy to do when you're a kid, to walk up to total strange adults and say nice things or whatever, but it was super cool that she came up to me and said hi. That's pretty cool. On the other end of the spectrum, though, it was sad that Slip Disc Records out of Long Island, New York, didn't show up this year, which really stinks because they're the main metal supplier at this event, typically. They usually have tons of classic records from bigger and indie labels of the time, so I had to dig through a lot of crates from other vendors to find some decent records, but I did find them. Overall, I picked up 7 records, so 1 more than last year. That's pretty cool. We've got a classic punk rock soundtrack, as well as 6 hard rock and heavy metal albums, 3 of which are the earliest releases from a certain Japanese metal band. Some of these will be Japanese pressings, which I was totally psyched to find. So with that, let's get to the records. First up is the 9th studio album from Australian hard rock band AC/DC. This is Flick of the Switch, released in 1983 by Atlantic Records. In fact, there's the label. How about that? Anyways, this is the last album to feature drummer Phil Rudd until his return in 1995 for Ballbreaker. The record was also self-produced, as the band chose not to work with Mutt Lange for this one. The idea was that they wanted a more raw and less polished sound this time around. I'd say to some degree they achieved that, but it also suffers a bit from a flat production overall, so maybe they should have used Mutt Lange. I don't know. Some good tracks here, though, including much of the first side of the record. I'd say Rising Power, This House is on Fire, and the title track are the real standouts. Definitely. Also, AC/DC recorded this album at Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas. That might sound a little familiar to some of you Maiden fans, because Iron Maiden did record Peace of Mind, Power Slave, and to some extent Somewhere in Time at that same studio. So, this isn't always the fan favorite, but it's a record I dig, and it did fill a hole in my AC/DC collection, so there you go. Next up is the soundtrack to the film Suburbia, both of which released in 1984, with the soundtrack put out by Enigma Records. So for those who've actually never seen this movie, Suburbia was directed by Penelope Spheris, who also brought us The Decline of Western Civilization documentaries, as well as Wayne's World, believe it or not. She also produced the Wake Up Dead music video for Megadeth. I know there's some fans of the band out there who don't know that. There's your connection. The plot involves a group of homeless punk rock kids known as the Rejected, who go to shows, they get in trouble, and they struggle with their own personal issues. Also lots of memorable characters and some killer band performances, not to mention some very quotable lines of dialogue. It's a bit of a cult classic film for me, and I know a lot of other people. Speaking of the bands, the 4 tracks they play in the film take up the first side of the record. The bands are DI, The Vandals, and TSOL. But also brief samples of the movie are in here in between each song, which is kind of cool. The second side of the record is the film score. It's by Alex Gibson, which is an interesting idea, especially to me, who likes both punk of this era and score soundtracks. It's pretty cool. It's like half and half. Favorites on this one, I think the one track that really sticks out for me is Richard Hung Himself from DI. Great song. I believe Slayer covered it at some point. It's also how I discovered DI, was through this movie. First time I saw it was definitely through a video rental. In fact, I actually worked at a video rental store in 1988 outside of Salt Lake City and played this movie quite often in the shop. I can also tell you that a lot of Mormon families who came in were not very happy about that. But this is still one of my favorite movies, and I love that I finally have the soundtrack on vinyl. In fact, here's the vinyl. It's hiding right here. There you go. Next is the second studio album from American metal band Tyrant. This is Too Late to Pray, released in 1987 by Metal Blade in association with Combat Records. In fact, you can see that Metal Blade and Combat are both mentioned. Fantastic. Metal Blade was the label they were signed to, but it's likely that Combat distro of this record, which in 1987 was probably a good route to go, considering the last half of the 80s. Combat pretty much ruled the roost in a lot of ways. They had a lot of great bands, a lot of good releases then. Many of you already know that, though. As for the band name, it's safe to say there are a number of Tyrants out there, especially back then. In fact, if you check Metal Archives, there are at least 25 of them listed there. This is easily the best known of them. This band hails from Pasadena, California. They were even on the Metal Massacre 3 compilation put out by Metal Blade back in 1983. Very cool US power metal here, and I would say that as good as the first album is, the second album is considerably better. You've got killer riffs, some occasionally doomy moments, and a nice variety of tracks too. Speaking of which, I definitely dig Beyond the Grave, as well as Vertilact and Eve of Destruction. I would check out all 3 of those. I gotta say, this was definitely a surprise find at the record fair, especially being in such good shape. I would say if you're interested, there is a 2018 reissue out there from Shadow Kingdom Records, which appears to be still available at the label's Bandcamp page, as well as their official website. So definitely pick this one up. Next is the debut album from Japanese metal band Loudness. This is The Birthday Eve, released in 1981 by Blow Up Records. So a lot of Westerners got to know this band on their 5th album, Thunder in the East, with the hit Crazy Nights, but they did have albums before that, and this is the first one. Great cover art, by the way. I love the baby trapped in the crystal. Sure, why not? So right away you can hear that this isn't necessarily the Loudness we got to know on Thunder in the East. It's an earlier version of the band, though I think the lineup is the same. Seriously hearing a whole lot of Nawabum influence on this one, though Nihara's voice is unmistakably Loudness. You'll recognize it instantly. As are the killer riffs and solos from Akira Takasaki, who should have been a bigger guitarist in the 80s metal scene than he was. I think it's kind of a shame he wasn't given the recognition that he clearly deserves. You could hear it on this record and others as well. I'm also suspecting that they were listening to a bit of Rush at this point, as I'm catching moments of that type of prog here and there. As for favorites, I definitely dig the song Loudness, as well as To Be Demon. I'm on Fire is a good one, as well as High Try. Gotta say, man, this is a gem to have. I would have loved to have found it back in the mid-'80s when we all discovered this band, but I have it now, and that's what matters. Good stuff. And if one Loudness album isn't enough, let's talk about another, namely their second studio album, called Devil Soldier, released in 1982 by Megaton Records. So we're still getting some of that prog influence at times, though some of that former Nawabum influence has been shedded quite a bit. The band is definitely starting to tap into some of the early 80s hard rock thing because, gotta say, there is definitely some Scorpions worship going on here, among other influences. Also, the record has more melodic mid-pace moments than the first record, which is consistently heavier than this one. This one's still pretty good. Also, the artwork on the front references the previous album with the devil baby hatched from the crystal egg. Look, where is he? Who knows, right? Well, if you flip it over, there he is. Now he's ready to be evil or something like that. Who knows? Anyways, favorites on this one are Lonely Player, Hard Workin', and Devil Soldier. Great tracks. You should check all of those out. By the way, the Megaton label is right there. Forgot to show the other record, but who cares? It's black. You know what it looks like. Anyways, a slightly mellower and hard rock direction for the band on this one, but still very listenable and has some occasional moments where it shines quite a bit, notably in the guitar work. Of course, more Takasaki. Guy's amazing. Anyways, definitely glad I got this one. And while we're on the subject, let's make this a triple shot with the third studio album from Loudness. This is The Law of Devil's Land, released in 1983 by B&M Records. So, as with the last two, we have some continuation to the cover art here. The Devil Baby is now an older kid, but for some reason he's wearing a cross. So yeah, that's kind of weird. Anyways, once you get past the really odd and out-of-place album intro, the record does kick in with some great up-tempo tracks. And right away you can tell they've heavied it up from the last album. Maybe they're kind of going back a little bit to the first record. I'm not sure. But definitely more of a metal album with some great riffs and those awesome Akira solos throughout. Songs I really dig on this one, Show Me the Way is really cool. Also, The Law of Devil's Land. And especially the album closer, which is called Speed. Kind of is what it sounds like it would be. Very cool. Label here from B&M is a Japanese label. And we did get a cool booklet in here. A 4-page here. There's the front. Some cool live shots of the band there. It does open up with full lyrics, albeit in Japanese, so good luck with that. So sadly, I still have a gap in my Loudness collection, because I am missing album number 4, which is called Disillusion, but I think having these 3 will now motivate me to track that record down. Of course, then I might have to choose between the Japanese language recording or the English one. There are 2 versions. Or you know what? Maybe I'll get both. You know how that goes. So, if I were to rank these 3 albums, I'd put The Birthday Eve first, this album second, and Devil Soldier third. Overall, it's really nice to have these hard-to-find Loudness records. You know, sometimes record fairs do have some occasional rarities, so I definitely wouldn't count these events out. Next up is probably the gem of this entire pickup, and that's the first single from American thrash metal band Metallica, or once thrash metal, depending on what argument you want to have. This is Whiplash, released in 1984 by Megaforce Records. In fact, that big, beautiful silver label is right there. God, it's good to see. So this is definitely one of those records I had as a kid that got tossed by my family. And it's safe to say that I really wanted this one back, presumably at any price. Evidently, that price was $75, but it is in near mint condition. The cover has a little bit of edge wear, but not too bad. I wanted this one really badly, so that's all the justification I need. Of course, the price was pretty standard for its current used market value as well. If you think I'm kidding, you can go to Discogs and look at that yourself. The single, in comparable condition, has shot up in value, especially over the last few years for some reason. Far beyond $75 in some cases. I did see $150. I saw $200 and up. So I'll take it for $75. Why not? One thing to point out about the B-sides of the so-called live songs of this album is they aren't live. They are alternate studio recordings from October 1983 with the recording of a crowd dubbed in, so it's fake live. I didn't know that as a teenager and probably wouldn't have cared either way, but we know other bands have done this anyway. Slayer did it, Typo Negative did it, you name it. So, is it a big deal? Is it not? I don't think so. As for favorites on this 4-song release, let's say everything on it. I mean, it's early Metallica, so yeah, all 4 songs. So, huge nostalgia for this single, or EP if you'd like. I am beyond psyched to have reacquired it. Definitely. So I'd like to thank Ian and Evan at Burlington Records for once again hosting this event. I know Evan shot a whole lot of pictures at the record fair, which will no doubt be at the Burlington Record Fair Facebook page at some point. You should do a search for that if you're interested, and I think a few of you are. Also cool to see some familiar faces there. Hello again to Kevin, also Albert from West Fairleigh, Vermont. Some of you might remember he was in my 2019 record fair video, so good to see him again. I did buy a record from him, specifically that Whiplash single, so thank you for that, by the way. Of course, I'm sure some of you go to these types of things, whether they're called record fairs or record expos, or maybe they're just flea markets or conventions that bring in record vendors. You should let me know in the comments about the events you go to, how you feel about them, and any cool finds you've gotten along the way. I'd be interested to hear about how other organizers set up and run these types of things as well, but I also want to hear about what you got. And if you've never gone to a record fair, let me know that too. And if you'd be interested in checking one out in your own area, I really love these events and absolutely look forward to them when they happen. Good stuff. And if this is your first time here, just so you know, my name is Matt. This is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on metal vinyl collecting. I also cover the subjects of classic and modern metal in general. If that sounds like it's of interest, definitely give this video a like, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so, and share the videos with some of your friends. And as always, I want to thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.